200 tons of explosive chemicals hurtling down a mountain. No driver, no brakes. And in its path lies the city of Helena, unsuspecting of the terror that is about to unfold. A day earlier, the Montana railing freight train handed over by Burlington Northern with its 49 cars departs Laurel. It arrives in Helena early in the morning, where the crew take on 3 helper engines to aid with the mountain climb over Mulan Pass. On the way up, however, the extreme cold leads to a loss of electrical power, as well as the failure of the cabin heater in the lead engine. When I say extreme cold, I mean temperatures as low as -33 degrees Celsius. This cold wave was among the most brutal ever experienced in the area. With the cab heat dying and windows frosting over, the lead engineer radios the dispatcher. "So, we are going to have to do something here at Austin. I am not going to leave out of here without any cab heaters." In the original locomotives, the road engineer overhears the conversation. He goes up to the lead unit and offers to take over the train. "I'll run the train the rest of the way. You can go back and ride in a warm unit." But the lead engineer refuses, stating, "No, we should do something about it. It's the principle of the thing." He makes the decision to switch the helpers with the road locos after coming to a stop at a siding called Austin. The train was brought to a stop on an incline of 2.2 degrees. After the helper engines were disconnected and moved to the siding track, the utility employee of the road engine was the one tasked with uncoupling the consist and securing the brakes. Per the rules, this would have meant setting the manual handbrakes on at least half of the cars. Instead, he opts for the air brakes, which uses compressed air from each car's reservoir. He applies partial braking by opening the valve only halfway. As to why he didn't open it fully to apply maximum brakes, his reasoning was, "I was trying to keep from putting the train into emergency. The guys I have been working with pretty much do it that way, to keep from getting stuck triple valves." He added that stuck valves usually occur near the end of the train, and that since I was wearing cowboy boots, I didn't really want to walk that train in that weather in my cowboy boots. While stylish, not a great choice considering the weather. But when asked why he didn't set any handbrakes, he reasoned, "It's not practice. You would have had to set probably more than half the brakes, from the rear end. Would have took a lot longer than it would just to go over the top of the hill." On the one hand, it's understandable that you would like to spend as little time as possible in such low temperatures. On the other, it was specifically the extreme cold that should have warranted extra care. He was well aware that regardless of the situation, handbrakes should be set, but alas, he did not. The air brakes at first seemed sufficient and, under normal circumstances, would have probably held the train, but in the unforgiving cold, due to shrinkage, the system began leaking on most of the carriages. As the 2 sets of locomotives were being recoupled, the road engineer asks for the helper unit's lights to be turned on for better visibility. Since he gets no answer, he goes over to turn it on himself. "So, I ran to the other unit and put the headlight on bright. And then I could tell, it was gone." The consist is now on its way to Helena, and it only has a few miles before it reaches town. Of the 49 cars, 6 hold hazardous materials, including 2 tankers with a 70% solution of hydrogen peroxide, which can explode when heated. Another tanker holds isopropyl alcohol and acetone, both highly flammable. The road engineer quickly alerts the others, who then hurry to complete the connections. They get the locos back on the main line and begin chasing the runaway train. The road engineer is in control, and in the pursuit, he proceeds right past Austin's east stop signal without receiving authority, as he figures that this is an emergency. Down the hill, he's having to apply emergency brakes multiple times, as the locos' independent brakes were not slowing them down. At this point, he instructs the assistant to get on the radio and say emergency, and tell Helena a train is coming down the hill. Meanwhile, in Helena, another helper unit is preparing to assist the train westward. Its engineer overhears the emergency radio but doesn't think much of it. Moments later, the consist arrives on the very same track. The carriages ram into the helper unit at around 40 km per hour. It doesn't sound like much, but it's enough to throw 15 cars from the track and rupture a number of tankers, including one of the hydrogen peroxide ones. What's worse is that the isopropyl alcohol sets on fire. This was not immediately obvious to the crew of the helper unit, so they make their way past the derailed train in a calm manner. An assistant trainmaster and yard clerk arrive at a nearby grade crossing to pick them up. Just as they meet, they notice the flames, and just a few seconds later, the city of Helena is jolted awake. The explosion is strong enough to break windows nearly 2 kilometers away, and to fling massive metal debris hundreds of meters, some penetrating houses. The blast even registers on some seismographs around the country. The building to receive the most damage is Carroll College, but it's the middle of the night, so the campus is thankfully mostly empty. The dorms also had heavy drapes over the windows to help against the cold, which protected some sleeping students from being hit with shrapnel. Luckily, only one of the 2 hydrogen peroxide cars explode, and not a single person loses their lives. Only a few minor injuries are reported, a statistic that would have been much worse had more of the cargo been involved in the explosion. But the night is long from over. The explosion had knocked out the electricity to the whole city, and toxic materials were still leaking and burning at ground zero. As such, an exclusion zone is established in a 3-kilometer wide area. About 3,500 people are evacuated, most staying over at relatives or friends. Firefighters struggle to contain the fire, as water from the hose is freezing midair, but they manage to put out the last flames next morning. A day later, all residents are allowed back in their homes. Thankfully, the hazardous chemicals end up doing relatively little environmental damage. Property damage, on the other hand, is estimated at $6 million in 1989. The National Transportation Safety Board's report concludes that the probable cause of the accident was the failure of the train crew to properly secure their train, the main contributing factor being the extreme cold weather. I found nothing to indicate that legal action was ever taken against the Montana Rail Link or any of its employees, and it's unclear what damages they paid for besides railroad equipment. Interestingly, the accident referred to as the blast by locals became an example in research papers related to nuclear material release. A study in 2003 by the United States Department of Energy assessed the severity of the train crash had nuclear materials been on board. In this hypothetical scenario, they figured that the risk of a nuclear disaster was fairly low due to the robust design of nuclear fuel and nuclear waste carriages. Today, you won't find any signs of the blast, but the city's craziest night is not forgotten. The events that miraculously claimed no lives will be told for generations to come.